Hi, thank you for having me today. Jim couldn't make it, unfortunately, so I'm sure I'll be a shadow of his presentation, but it's nice to have you. I wanted to just spend a little time talking. There have been some changes in D.C. in addition to the administration, some changes on Capitol Hill. Wanted to talk to you a little bit about that and about the overall agenda for this year. I thought I'd talk a bit about timing and some of the bills that are coming up, so you can kind of get a sense of what might go on, particularly as it deals with pavement preservation and transportation. So this year, the Congress had to start with passing a bill to fund the government, since they didn't finish that last year. So, as you know, that in last week they passed the 2017 Omnibus Appropriations Bill. Last week also was the end, or the week before was the end of Trump administration's first 100 days. And I'm just going through some of these dates because I think it kind of gives you a sense of what might be happening and when. The government will have to pass a debt ceiling increase. Depends on how much money comes into the Treasury, but likely it'll happen around the fall of 2017. The debt ceiling increase is important because it usually requires a fair amount of negotiation between the Republicans and the Democrats, and sometimes other things get tacked on, and it ends up being an opportunity to move pieces of legislation. Later in the year, and we've started the process, but the deadline for the 2018 spending bills is September 30th of this year. And we have an FAA reauthorization, Federal Aviation Administration reauthorization, that happens September 30th. And that, too, is something that must pass. It could just be continued, but something has to be done. So it ends up being, again, a moving vehicle for transportation-related provisions. And then lastly, the FAST Act expires September 30th, 2020. So this year, the overall agenda, the Affordable Care Act repeal was one of the top things that this Congress wanted to do. As we know, it's been proven a little more difficult than they originally thought. Secondly, they have to, there are all the nominations for the cabinet and the new administration that have to be approved, and there was a Supreme Court nominee. Tax reform is high on the agenda. After the Affordable Care Act, it's probably the #1 priority. And then something that Congress has been working on that hasn't gotten quite as much attention but is fairly impactful is the Congressional Review Act. They can repeal provisions that were put in place in sort of the waning months of the prior administration. So they've passed about 13 of these bills to repeal regulations, and they are agency-wide, government-wide, a multitude of different agencies, and impact the way businesses, or the requirements that businesses have, and agency regulations. 2018 appropriations bills are underway, and again, the debt limit, and then infrastructure is I think the next priority of the administration. As you saw, the Affordable Care Act, the House, after a false start in March, was able to pass a bill to repeal the Affordable Care Act last week. The Senate is beginning to will take up that issue. It will not happen immediately. They're going to wait for the OMB score, so they'll know how much this costs and what it does, and then they're going to take a look at it and are planning to draft their own bill and conference it with the House bill. So that will take the Senate some time. In addition to what it does substantively, the Affordable Care Act repeal ends up being a pay-for the tax reform. So that is one of the reasons why Congress started with it and why it's important that they get it done. The other thing that's happening in the Senate are nominations. And as you know, most of the cabinet's been nominated and confirmed now. I think 21 of the 22 positions. The trade administrators still not confirmed. And there are 556 key positions in the government, and about 1,200 actually that need to have Senate confirmation. 66 are confirmed and 35 are awaiting confirmation, and 473 positions have no nominees. At the same point, when Obama was elected, he had 190 people in place. And why that's important is because while career staff at these agencies can certainly do the work and have the expertise, when a new president comes in, they're reluctant to make major policy changes until they have, one of their own political appointees in one of these positions. And as you can see by this chart, most of these agencies are these secretaries are relatively unstaffed. So that delays a lot of the work that, that this administration will want to get done. I think it's attributed to a couple of things. One, I think, President Trump didn't know he was going to win. I think it was a surprise. So I don't think he hadn't lined up a lot of people for these positions. So it's taken a little longer to do that. The other thing is they're putting a lot of people into place who don't have prior government experience, and so security clearances take longer. And then in the Senate, the Democrats haven't been that happy with how things have progressed, and so they've dragged their feet a little bit on the votes. So the combination is put the government in a position where really you don't have all of the people in place that you would want to help get things done, which is slowing. Like you hear about these things, we're going to have a transportation bill, it's going to come out. Well, someone has to be, and the agency is full of people, but they're going to have people check, provide clearance for these, this work that gets done, and those people aren't really in place yet, or many of them aren't. Tax reform, after the Affordable Care Act, will likely focus on tax reform. The House has already been working on it. The Senate has an initial bill. President Obama put out a broad policy statement recently. The tax reform and the timing, we've heard a lot of different things about timing. Tax reform takes a long time. And as we can see with the health care, these things aren't, happening quickly. So I would suspect, that it'll be, end of the year, probably earliest. And tax reform will be important to infrastructure because for a couple different reasons. One, there is potentially there will be repatriation of overseas corporate earnings, which potentially could be used for infrastructure funding. And, potentially they'll decide to grapple with the highway trust fund shortfalls in tax reform. Again, the Congressional Review Act, 13 bills have been introduced and passed that have, decreased regulatory burdens. It's more about the debt limit. It'll probably happen in the fall, and it also could be an opportunity to work on infrastructure. You all know and live this, so you don't really need these statistics, but they're pretty astounding. And I think Congress on a regular basis needs to think about this and see what their lack of ability to pass, substantive legislation can do. When the FAST Act was passed, the fact that it didn't, resolve the highway trust fund shortfall was really a tragedy and contributes to some of our infrastructure problems. In this Congress, in the Senate, the Senate Committee of Jurisdiction is the Senate Environment and Public Works, and in the House it's the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. The Senate has a new Chairman Barrasso from Wyoming, and Tom Carper from Delaware is the ranking Democrat member. In the House, and they're both new. In the House, Chairman Schuster remains chairman. He is term limited, so this is his last Congress to be chairman of that committee. And Peter DeFazio from Oregon has worked with him as well. Both, DeFazio, Barrasso, and Schuster, they are all from states that have a lot of rural areas. So I think, when the talk about infrastructure is tolling and public-private partnerships, that can be a part of it, but it's hard for me to see how those chairman and ranking member would end up passing a bill that wouldn't have public funding for rural areas given the composition of their states. Additionally, on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, 20% of the members are new members, so that requires, getting them to the educating them so that they understand what the problems are and what the needs are. That takes some time. Both committees have started the process of general hearings and information sessions. And then the Trump administration. Secretary Chao was confirmed in January, as you know. She's Mitch McConnell, the majority leader's wife. She's held, any number of positions in prior administrations. She knows what to do and how to get things done. So I think that in terms of accomplishing something in the infrastructure area, we're lucky to have Elaine Chao in the driver's seat there. When? The second 100 days, possibly. There's been some talk about something coming out in May. My guess is if something does come out, it'll be a broad policy statement like we saw in the tax area. I don't think we'll see much detail. I think it's going to take, a while for them to hone in on exactly what this transportation or infrastructure, not transportation, but infrastructure, would be. And to that point, when you hear this $1 trillion over 10 years for infrastructure, it's really quite broad. They're talking about roads, rail, transit, air traffic control, energy, broadband deployment, veterans hospitals, so a lot of different things. And when we talk about a $1 trillion infrastructure package, it is not going to be $1 trillion of public funded projects. It's going to come in a variety of different mechanisms, ranging from private-public partnership, tax incentives, streamlining of regulations, and then there will also be some direct investment. And where's that money going to come from? I think potentially it could come from repatriation of foreign corporate earnings if there is tax reform and that's successful. Tax incentives, so a lot of different options. And I think, when in the talk that's been in the media about an infrastructure bill, it kind of leads one to believe that it'll be one big bill, and I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case at all. I think we could see, I talked earlier about all those different things going on this year. I think we easily could see, a piece of infrastructure included in a tax reform bill, a piece of infrastructure potentially attached to the Federal Aviation Administration reauthorization. It's really too early to tell, and I don't think they know how yet they're going to do it, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if we end up seeing, throughout the course of the year, getting to the goal in a number of different ways. The Senate Minority Leader Schumer has an infrastructure proposal, and these are some of the statistics on his proposal. He's in the minority, so he won't get everything that he wants. No one will. But the Republicans are going to have to negotiate with him. And he is an advocate for a fair amount of direct investment. So I think we'll see there's going to be a lot of interplay between, again, how we improve infrastructure and what an infrastructure package includes. And there'll be, it's not going to get done without negotiation with Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. So where are we with all of this? I'd say the path forward is opaque for an infrastructure bill. I think things have gone a little slower than everyone expected, but I wouldn't expect to have anything done before the end of the year at the earliest. But I think it will be a combination of public-private partnerships, tax incentives, direct investment, repatriation, maybe a gas tax and a tax bill. And we really need, and I think one of the things that FP2 does, and I think everyone out there is doing, is we really need to continue to have voices supporting, maintaining the investment in our infrastructure. I know there's a big coalition, or a lot of people are coming and descending on DC in the middle of May to talk about the needs out there, and I think Congress and the administration need to continue to hear how it's important and what the condition of our roads is and how it affects people all over the country. And I know you all know that better than anyone. And pavement preservation, I think one of the things that we try to do is, and would love to hear more about it, was what works, what doesn't work, why is it valuable? Is a federal pavement preservation program necessary? Is what we have now, does that work fine? And those are some of the things that FP2 is grappling with, and in the case where they have answers, talking to people on the Hill. And I'm happy to take questions either here or I'll be here this evening, so can answer questions later as well. Thank you.